Hello, everyone, and welcome to At Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to our guest, Faye Wattleton, co-founder of EeroQ, former president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Faye, great to see you.
Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today, Andy.
A lot to talk about, but I want to ask you about EeroQ. What is EeroQ?
EeroQ is a quantum hardware developer. Quantum is quantum computing, that is, because there are different aspects of quantum, is the next generation of information processing. It is not the same science as the classic computers that we use every day, but is built on a very different science that is much more powerful, has the capacity to process a lot more information, and will be a revolutionary advancement in health care and in the identification of drugs and other kind of scientific discoveries.
And the name, where does that come from, Faye?
Oh, EeroQ is, that's a great, thank you for asking me, because that's a great story. When I was asked to join the two people that were working on forming this company in 2016, one of the people is a professor at Michigan State University, a physics professor, a postdoc from Caltech, and he had a newborn whom they named Eero, because the father is from Finland, the family is from Finland, and his son's name is Eero. And so we named the company after Eero, and we simply added Q to it, and there you have it. 7 years later, we're a very vibrant company now in Chicago.
You mentioned the other founders. I'm curious, how did you get involved in this endeavor?
Well, they asked me, and it's one of those things that you're away on holiday and you meet people that are very interesting, and I've had a very charmed life in that regard that I met you, okay? As an interesting, interesting and the opportunities that we've had in the exchanges over the years. And in this case, one of the co-founders was on the Martha's Vineyard as a house guest at the same place that I was vacationing. And we just started talking about the world and all of the issues that we now confront, and also that information is really not accessible to a lot of people on this planet, and that the current generation of computing is running its limits. And he was thinking about starting a company. And so I was invited to lunch in Chicago by these two guys, by Johannes Parliament and Nick Farina. Well, Nick Farina is the CEO of EeroQ, and Johannes is the chief scientific officer. And they said, we want to form a company, but we need someone who has corporate governance background, who has a broad view of the world. You've had a lot of experience, that this is a revolutionary technology that we think that we will build a company to construct, and we need someone to help to guide that. Now, Andy, they are like younger than my daughter, okay? So they seem to think I'm kind of smart. I just say to them, well, you can't be as smart as I am because you haven't lived as long as I've lived. And so they were smart enough to tap into the resources as well as my experiences, having led a major organization that served people around the world.
Right. You know, with quantum computing, you hear about it, and then the metaverse comes up, and then you don't hear about it. And you hear about it, and then AI comes up and takes all the oxygen out of the room. Right? I mean, is it really like this trend that's growing? I mean, right now there's a lot of attention on AI.
Yes.
Is it connected to AI or not? Or?
Well, it will certainly has the potential to superpower AI, and there's a lot of anxiety and angst about the powers of AI. Quantum has the ability to give it even more power. I don't know if you saw the movie Oppenheimer. At the beginning, they thought that quantum couldn't happen. Mr. Einstein said that these were violations of the laws of nature, and there are certain subatomic laws that nature, that you have to reckon with when you're doing these kinds of experiments and manipulating matter. I, by the way, am a graduate of Ohio State with a degree in nursing with a foundation in science before I could get into the nursing program. And so, kind of understanding the language and the possibilities of what science could do not only captivated me emotionally, but theoretically I had some knowledge of what would be attempted. And make no mistake, we have not achieved nirvana. We hopefully have learned from the AI controversies and the strife that now has been engendered by not thinking ahead of what the potential pitfalls are as well as the opportunities, that in quantum we will think about bringing in a multidisciplinary dialogue from across society, because this science will reshape society as we know it and information processing as we know it. And so it can't be just allowed to be held in the hands of a few.
Right. Well, I love to hear that. And I also, it's interesting to hear you bridge your former life, your former career, and this endeavor. And you know, it's interesting because most people know you as the former head of the National Organization of Planned Parenthood, international organization, I should say, and you became, you know, prominent and well known because of that. There's so much to ask you about that backstory and how you got there. I guess, you know, just sort of overall, what was that organization like? Take us back to when you first walked in the door as president of Planned Parenthood.
Well, I had served as the local chapter executive director for 7 years.
And what year did you become?
I became president in 1978.
Right.
Long time ago. I still hold the distinction of being the longest serving national president of Planned Parenthood. I left in 1992. It became the 7th largest nonprofit organization in the country at a time in which it was under severe pressures and attacks politically and violently. I really became involved with Planned Parenthood as a local chapter board member. When I speak around the country and people ask me, how do I get involved? And I just said, call them up and see, do they need board members? Do they need people to come in to volunteer? And you'd be surprised at where that leads. So I was the board member of a local chapter in Dayton, Ohio. And then I served as the executive director, that is the chief officer of that chapter, for 7 years before becoming president in 1978.
Right. And you mentioned the violence, and I know there was bombings and all sorts of, you were threatened. Your life was threatened all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, I want you to maybe, Faye, sort of compare and contrast that time period to the time period we're in now. You see the demonstrations, you see people talking about divisiveness. How are things similar today and how are they different?
Well, believe it or not, they were more intense. You know, the one aspect of leadership with which I did not have to contend is the internet and the digital world. But the political strife was enormous. The emergence of the political right occurred during those years. The Catholic Church had, the Catholic Conference of Bishops, under the auspices of the Catholic Church, had made clear that politically they were going to work against the availability of birth control and the emerging potential of legal abortion. The right-wing movement of the moral majority that came out philosophically of a religious perspective that I had been raised on. My mother was an evangelical minister in a Protestant denomination, so I knew their language. I knew how they thought about life and the restrictions that should be put on women. And so I came to understand this issue is not about fetuses and about the so-called unborn, but that this was really an internal, within the country, an internal struggle for women's true equality and liberty. Mm-hmm. That was on the foundation of the 2 degrees in nursing in which I hold, in which I cared for women who were the victims of illegal abortion. I cared for children in my training at Children's Hospital in Columbus under the auspices of Ohio State University that had been brutalized, who had been abused. And so you can grow up one way and you can lock yourself into that point of view and you think, that's the way the world is and I'm going to work for the way the world is. Or you can say, well, that's not the way the world, my world is not everybody's world. And we have to extend compassion and understanding and to help people to make decisions, the better decisions for themselves as opposed to being imposed upon.
And high-profile business people, businessmen, helped you, became supporters. Some people
yes,
that our audience knows, and I'm wondering if you could tell us about some of them.
Oh, yes. I mean, I had great mentors, and I'm glad that you asked that. One of them was the former executive chairman of Huffy Manufacturing. They made bicycles. I would say that my political mentorship at the national level got really off the ground by a man whose name is David Garth. That now, may he rest in peace, but once upon a time he was considered the foremost political advisor in the country in the early 80s. I came to the national presidency just as Reagan was about to be elected in 1980, and so I received enormously valuable guidance from a lot of people who wanted to see me succeed. There were a lot of people who thought I would not succeed, particularly when I said that one of my first objectives as the president of Planned Parenthood was to restore Medicaid funding for poor women to have access to safe pregnancy termination. And that was considered to be sacrilege, and that engaged what I would eventually encounter as a public figure, the leader and the image of my organization, that I had only the focus on abortion, which was not true. What I focused my leadership on was the choice to make the decision and the power to make the decision safely and in the context of one's personal life.
Right. But I want to ask you to follow up a little bit more about some of those business people, like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger.
Oh, well, there are lots of fun stories about them. Yes, Warren Buffett has been a long-standing pro-choice supporter. The Buffett Foundation is one of the leading funders of training for doctors to perform safe pregnancy termination. When I came to the presidency of Planned Parenthood, we could not get insurance at a reasonable rate. I mean, I'm a daughter of Southern Black people, and there's a lot of common sense that goes into how we carry out our lives. And so it made no sense to me that we were being asked by the insurance companies to pay at the level and the rank of neurosurgeons for our premiums, and that just didn't make sense to me. But the reasoning was that we would be categorized as such, so that because what happens if a woman gets pregnant using our services and delivers a damaged child, and that the insurance companies would be liable for it. So I said, this doesn't make sense. We should just save our money and put it in an investment, and we should insure ourselves, because we were not getting any lawsuits. We were not getting the kind of problems that had been projected by the insurance companies, and so we formed Planned Protection Insurance. And Charlie Munger thought that was the dumbest thing he had ever heard.
But Charlie Munger was a supporter of yours?
Charlie Munger was a major supporter. I did not know him. He was a major supporter of Planned Parenthood of Los Angeles. So he was very much invested. At the time I became president, there were over 200 chapters in the organization. And Planned Parenthood of Los Angeles was one of them. And he loved the executive director there and was a very generous donor. And so, of course, his background in the insurance industry and risk management should have been one that we honored and respected, and thought that we should have thought that, well, Charlie Munger says we're dumb to do this, so we shouldn't do it.
Right.
But we went right ahead and formed it, and today it is a major source of protection for the chapters in providing healthcare services to families around the country.
All right, so you disagree with Charlie Munger on insurance, and you ended up being right.
Well,
Maybe.
But no, it's just common sense. It was common sense. I mean, we were not doing neurosurgery,
Right. What concerns you, Faye, the most about the Dobbs decision? And, just taking a neophyte, 30,000 view look, doesn't it make sense for the states to decide?
What concerns me most is that everyone seems to believe that the Dobbs decision came out of nowhere, and that it was simply an overturn of Roe v. Wade, when Roe v. Wade had been overturned over a period of 40, almost 50 years. What concerns me about that is that there was a profound lack of understanding and complacency about what was being taken apart that had been so hard fought and won for women that goes back to the early 20th century, where the pioneers were jailed for handing out literature, and that married couples, even in the mid-60s, were not legally permitted to engage in contraceptive use in their bedrooms, and that the court, led by a justice that was appointed by Richard Nixon, saying that we can all disagree on these matters of personal decisions, but what we should not disagree on is the intervention of the government in private life. Mm-hmm. And that was Blackmun's, those were his words. They are today, in the context of today's political developments, the wisdom of them is just stunning. Over those years, Andy, there were repeated efforts from the court to take apart Roe v. Wade. Dobbs was not out of the blue. It was not out of the night and a big surprise. In 2007, the court said that states could ignore a woman's health in prohibiting abortion. That took away one of the main protections of Roe. So this has been an engaged process to chip away, and we're seeing now, okay, Dobbs was handed down, and that was a profound decision. I mean, I don't want to minimize it, but let's just say it for what it is. It wasn't a reversal, it was a completion. And that now we go on to what they promised us back in the early 70s, that they would move on to contraception. And that's exactly the way the movement is going. And so what do we have? Mifepristone is now under attack, the medical methods of pregnancy termination. And this is really, I think what we really must finally come to terms with is that this is really about control, about controlling women. It is not about the protection of fetuses. It is really about controlling behavior and using this very, very emotional issue for political purposes. I will say this, and one of the reasons why I think that there may be an opportunity for the long journey back is before Dobbs, there were about a little bit less than 1 million pregnancy legal terminations a year. Over 50 years, that's a lot of, those are a lot of pregnancy terminations. That means a lot of families have chosen, a lot of women have chosen to terminate a pregnancy. The research we know is that for women who choose to terminate pregnancy, they usually do so because of timing, not that they don't want to ever be mothers, but that it's not the timing that would be opportune for them to carry a pregnancy.
Right.
And by the way, pregnancy is not inconsequential. It's a very serious condition.
I want to ask you, and this is a final question about CEOs and boards, and it pertains to what you were just talking about with Roe v. Wade and Dobbs. With all these issues that are divisive, when should boards and CEOs weigh in? How do they decide this is something I need to make a statement about?
Well, I think on matters of personal rights and individual liberties, I don't see that boards, if you're speaking of corporate boards, I don't believe that these are areas that they need to speak on necessarily. I mean, it depends on who their customers are. It depends on who their employees are, whether they are going to provide through the health care plan, whether they will provide these services through their corporate health care plan. So those are issues that it may come through that mechanism. And I think that one should grapple with the fundamental question of, will we leave it to the individual to decide, or will we be part of a force that attempts to dictate the personal and most private decisions of our employees or our customers? That's what this boils down to. Now, I've said to you, my mother was a minister. I was raised in the church. I was raised on a church pew. I never heard her once suggested that we should all go down to the courthouse and vote on this issue to impose her belief, which was that abortion was killing and it was a sin and it should never be done. She never did. But she believed that she could persuade people or women not to choose that, not to do that, and to be fruitful and multiply. And she believed in the strength of her ministry to persuade behavior as opposed to imposing it through the force of law. There's something highly dictatorial and mean-spirited about forcing a woman who's going through a very difficult circumstance in her life and invading the privacy of that decision where we have no business turning. And so I would hope that corporations would leave it on that basis, that we are not making choices for our employees or our customers about their individual decisions. But if we provide health care coverage for our employees, this is a service that is a part of reproductive health care, and it should be performed or offered safely. One of the points that I think should not ever be forgotten is that, I came to this because I saw illegal and the results of it. It will not stop the practice. It will only make it unsafe and dangerous. And that's how much do you not like women that on the political platforms of this country, we are debating this very private aspect of our bodies.
Faye Wattleton, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is at Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer. We'll catch you next time.